Are you chasing a version of success that sparkles on the surface, but somehow leaves you feeling empty inside? Tune in as our insightful guest, Michelle Pollock, helps us uncover why success so often doesn't feel as good as it looks and what we can do about it. Let's dive in. Michelle Pollock is a high performance and leadership coach who works with ambitious women to determine what success looks like to them now so their lives can feel as good as they look. Using her framework, The Art of Compassionate Command, Michelle's clients learn to own their strengths, use their values as a compass, set boundaries, trust themselves, and let life be messy in order to show up bigger, braver, and bolder in the world. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, Loree. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here today. And I'm so excited to talk about the topic we're going to talk about. But first of all, I'm just curious. I'm sure you didn't come right out of college being a performance and leadership coach. So tell me, what were you doing before and what really caused you to make that shift in your career?
So, I, when I came right out of college, I actually was a performer. I
Oh,
was a dancer and an actress, and I was doing that for a bit of time. I did some regional theater and then I was in New York City and I found myself auditioning for a national tour of a Broadway musical. I was actually at a callback and we had to cartwheel across the room. That was part of the callback, like just cartwheel across the room. And I got to the other side of the room and I thought to myself, I don't really want to leave New York City to cartwheel across the stage 8 shows a week. Like that doesn't feel like what I was had in mind when I set out
mm-hmm,
to do this.
mm-hmm,
And I started to realize that who I was becoming wasn't necessarily aligned with the dream I had once had of myself. And it that part of my story, that my journey from there to where I am now was a constant search for what is the thing that I do want now? Because for years and I mean, from the time I was a child, 3 years old, I was sure I was going to be a star. Theater
mm-hmm.
was my life. That was it. I was a theater major in college. And so I had the realization that that wasn't what I wanted anymore, but I wasn't clear about what I did. So where I started was I went to the other side of things and I actually worked for Broadway producers, and I was part of the team that helped to bring the show Avenue Q to Broadway. And I worked with the film director Baz Luhrmann on his adaptation of La Boheme for Broadway. And it was an incredible experience. And then I left New York and I went out to Los Angeles and I worked in television. And I had these very like sexy, shiny jobs, right? Where people
Mm-hmm.
were like, oh my God, so cool. It's so amazing success by other people's standards. And yet I constantly was feeling like I do not want this. Like something doesn't feel right to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something just feels like it's missing. And I kind of just went on this quest to find the missing thing. At the same time, it took me a long time because it was so challenging for me to give up this idea of what I was supposed to be. So when I finally left performing and went into more of the business and producer side of theater, I had this picture like, I am going to be a producer.
Mm-hmm.
That's the direction I'm going in, whether it's theater or it's film and TV. And that was the trajectory I was on. And even when kind of the universe threw some signals at me that maybe that's not the direction you want to be going in, it was so challenging for me to let go.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my brain, if I didn't fulfill that idea of what I was supposed to be, then I was failing. But ultimately, it was having children that really allowed me to reassess and get clear about what was most important to me. And doing that allowed me to start to see things through a different perspective. And I decided I went, I was off from work for a short time, staying home with my kids. And when I went back to work, it was part time. I was creative consulting for Paramount Plus. I worked on Grease Live with them. And that was kind of, I'm dipping my toe back in the water to see if this is what I want. And that was when it was like, oh, this is not what I want anymore. This is very clear to me that this is not aligned with the woman that I currently am. And so I had a very good friend who was a coach. And I had had people tell me for years, I'd always, since the moment that I started therapy when I was 23 years old and saw so much change for the good in my life, I went to therapy on and off throughout the years, but I was always interested in personal development. I was
Mhm.
constantly reading books,
Yeah.
wanting to understand who I was. Why did I operate this way? Could I operate at a different or a higher level? And so people had often said to me, you should be a coach. You should be a coach. And I was like, the coach, that's not even a thing. What are you talking about? Turns out it's totally a thing,
Yeah,
right?
I was the same way. I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Yes.
Right.
And so I had a conversation with this good friend who was having a lot of success coaching. And he pointed me towards the program where he did training, and it was very unlike me. I'm usually one of those people that researches everything, but he was thriving and I really trusted him, and I just said, "Great, I'm gonna try it." And so I went for my first training, and it was like the heavens opened and like the light came down and the angels sang ah. It was just like, oh my God, this is my thing. This is
Yeah.
so obviously my thing. And all these doubts about all the different paths I could go down that had gone through my mind over the years, just that was it. I was clear and I was committed. And that was in 2016. And I have not looked back. Once I did that first part of the program, I signed up for the whole thing and I started my coaching business in 2017. I got certified and did the whole. So
What a
that's how I
story,
am.
Michelle. What a story. I really appreciate your journey so much, and what came through to me while you were speaking is, and I wanted to point this out, is that there is so much clarity we can find when we go and do something and we realize, "No, this is not what I wanna do." So going back and testing the waters initially and just getting that reaction of, "No, this isn't it." It's good information even though it's not telling you what you should do yet. You didn't know exactly what that was yet. I think sometimes we hesitate to get that sort of negative reaction with something, but it is really good information to have. It's like, well, not knowing that this is not it is information that's important, and then you can, if you want to really listen to yourself in that moment, you can pivot. If you wanna keep hitting against the wall, you can keep going.
Yes, that's exact. I mean, I hit my head against the wall for so long. I think partially because I didn't know what else to do and I
Yeah.
didn't know where to go for help. I wish I'd known about the idea of a coach at that time to help me. I mean, I saw a career counselor and we did all the different tests and
Mhm.
it didn't help me. That didn't help me it told me a lot of what I already knew about
Right,
myself.
right. You can't tell what you don't know through those types of tests, right?
Right. So it was a lot of time spent not trusting my gut and like kind of I call it operating from the brain up. I just kept listening to my brain telling me over and over again, "No, this is your path. You just have to have more grit and have to keep going after it." Even though my body was saying to me like, "This is not it. This is not what you want. You don't feel good." So,
Yeah. It it is such a hard place to be in because we've been programmed for our whole lives around what the idea of success looks like. You're supposed to go to college and then get a fancy job or whatever it is for you that your ideal was as a kid and heard from your parents,
mhm,
from the society that in the community that you grew up with. And then when you get there, and this is what we're going to talk about, you get there and your job looks great on paper, and people, like, especially in your case, Michelle, working in like television and that kind of thing, people are like,
totally.
"Wow, good for you. You've made it."
Yep.
But inside, you weren't feeling it. So Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why success doesn't always feel as good as it looks.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think you teed this up perfectly. We are so young when we set out to quote make it in the world, right? We're babies when we leave college. And by the way, let's talk about the fact that we're supposed to know what we want to do with our lives when we go to college. I mean, I actually I did because I was I knew I wanted to be an actress. But
Mhm.
most of my friends, when we got to college at 18 years old, they had no idea. They just picked something because they had to pick something, right?
Mhm.
And there's so much wrapped up in following through on the thing you said you were going to do. And there's so little room for us to continue to evolve and expand as we get older. I mean, our brains aren't even fully developed by the time we leave college. Your brain does not fully develop till you're in your mid to late 20s. How could you possibly know what you want to do for the rest of your life? And then there's that part of it as well that we're supposed to do one thing for the rest of our lives, which is so unrealistic. Because again, as we grow and evolve and meet new people and have new influences and learn new things, our worlds expand so vastly and greatly. And I think
Mhm.
this societal idea that success is a long term job and getting to the corner office and owning a home and having a family, like all of these things that do we ever stop to say to ourselves, well, what do I really want? What
Mhm.
makes me tick? What excites me? What lights me up inside? It might have nothing to do with a family or an office or, and so when we set out, especially highly ambitious people, when
Mhm.
we say we're setting out on this path, sometimes it actually holds us back rather than truly catapulting us forward.
You're spot on there as far as we decide to step our first foot on these paths at such young age, and we don't know what we don't know, and we don't really even know ourselves. Like, I didn't know much about me at all when I was that age. And honestly, I could tell you that it wasn't until COVID when I
Mm,
started actually asking myself, what do I want? What lights me up? What would I be great at? What kind of impact could I create if I actually loved what I was doing? And so these questions weren't even a thought. I was like, okay, I got my first job with the big name company.
mhm,
I was making more than my mother had been making after 15, 20 years as a teacher.
mhm.
I already made it on day 1. I
Yeah.
was like, "Go me." And so I was gonna be there for 30 years, just like everybody else, until I started to not feel like it was for me anymore. I grew out of that dream.
Yeah. There's, I'm sure, a lack of satisfaction. You start to have the Sunday scaries, right? The Monday, Sunday blues. Or there's this feeling of, I know there's something else out there for me. It shows up in multitudes of ways. But I think you said something, you said you stop to ask yourself what you want. And I think that we just start going on automatic. We wake up, we go to work. If we have children, we take care of them, we take care of our families, and we run on automatic and we never slow down enough to just actually get introspective and ask ourselves the important questions. And there are just a few really important questions to help guide us down a path. Or we ask the questions, and like for me, the answer was, well, I don't know. And got stopped and stuck in I don't know, rather than saying, okay, well, let's see what we can do, where can do some exploring to figure it out. And the other thing I wanted to say about asking yourself what you want as a woman, I I have this theory that when women allow themselves to actually truly ask themselves, what do I want, and go after it, it is a radical act of social justice because
Mm.
we have been conditioned for so long to take care of everybody else's needs and put everybody else's needs first. It's just that's how we survived for so many years
Mhm.
because we couldn't own a home. on our own until 1974, or open a bank account on our own until 1974, or own a credit card. We had to have a man who did those things with us, whether it was our husband or our brother or our father. We could not rely solely on ourselves. And so the way that we were able to make sure that we were alive and taken care of, that we survived, was by making sure that we took care of others.
Mhm.
And so that still courses in our DNA today. It takes a long time to absolve ourselves of those instinctual feelings that we have. And so as we start to do that, as we start to actually shift into, I can be a caretaker of my family or of other people in my life, but I can put myself and my wants and my needs first. Because if
Mhm.
I don't, nobody else will.
Mm.
And as we do that, and our daughters and our sisters and our grandchildren start to see us doing that, it shifts. That's what shifts the DNA.
Yep. Yeah, I really love that idea, Michelle. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but it feels true to me. Hello, it's Loree Philip here. I just wanted to share a free gift that I created especially for the Daring to Leap community. If you have lost that excitement in your work, I want you to know that you do not have to start from scratch or make a giant leap. There are small things you can shift that will make a big difference. I created a free guide and a workbook called the Career Energy Boost, a powerful resource crafted to help you reignite that spark within your professional life. If you're ready to add some life and vibrancy in your career, you can download your free copy now on the daringtoleap.tv website or by using the QR code on the screen. You deserve a career that brings you joy and fulfillment. Now, back to the show. And I honestly I was in that trap for myself as far as my energy was expressed outward on my team, with my family, with my kids, with my husband, and I was happy kind of bringing everybody else up and supporting everybody else up, and I wasn't skilled at turning inward and reflecting and understanding, what do I really want? And those kind of questions that we were talking about, it was so foreign to me that when I was like you, I didn't have a clue what else I wanted to do.
Mm,
Not a clue. Didn't know where to start with it. I had at some point I had thought, well, if I knew what I was passionate about, I would do it for sure. But I don't know what it is, so I'm going to keep with the status quo, right? Until I think the universe and our bodies and all of the signs that show up that tell you something's not right keeps coming up until and it will get stronger
well,
and stronger
hits
and
you over the
stronger
head
until
with
you
its
listen.
message.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I went and took yoga teacher training, and I took an interior design class, and I looked into going to grad school to become a social worker, which is probably the closest that most aligned with where I've kind of landed up. But it was it was it was I think it was the fact that I couldn't let go of the idea I had. And when I finally was able to let go of that, it was that, and also it was the constant voice of the inner critic in my head telling me like, what else are you going to possibly do? That voice saying, what else would you do? You're on a trajectory. Why would you leave it? You're making decent money. What else is there in our society? You're making good money. You have security. You're not qualified to do anything else. And then I had all sorts of like entrepreneurial ideas, which I just shot down before they even,
Yeah.
not to mention the fact that I was constantly looking for external validation from other people to let
Hmm.
me know that anything that I was thinking about was okay. And when I didn't get it, that was it.
Yeah.
And I think with coaching, where there were a couple things that were different. I didn't tell almost anybody what I was up to because I actually didn't want their opinion. I
Right.
was afraid if I heard their opinion, I was going to take it in too much. And so it wasn't until I was like knee deep in that I finally started letting people know, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, this is what I'm doing
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, that's a different energy. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you this is what I'm doing. I feel like you feel that it's important to you and it's gonna happen, and so get on board. Or well, and it was interesting with friends and family, what I found is that they're just scared for us. They're
Mhm.
not trying to be negative Nancy's. They're not trying to be mean or not believe in you. What they're trying to do is keep you safe. And it it feels and it's perceived to be risky to go leave whatever secure thing you might be doing now and try something new or different you've never done before. And so that difference in the security and the newness, it's scary for the person who's doing it, but it's also scary for the people that care about them. And so there is a bit of that in there. And so I appreciate that shift in your perspective because at some point it's like this is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that was a big thing. And it's a big thing that I work on with my clients is around learning to trust yourself
Mhm.
and getting clear about that, those voices in your head that are also really at the end of the day just trying to keep you safe. That's what they
Mhm.
think they're doing,
I think.
but it's having you avoid all risk. And you can't really do anything in your life without risk at the end of the day, right? You
Yeah.
can't try anything. And there's no guarantees. We have these jobs that provide security. Nobody knows what's going to happen. No one
Right.
knows. I can't tell you the number of people. I mean, I got laid off from my job at CBS when I was 8 months pregnant in
Mm.
2008 in the when
Yeah.
everything just crashed. I had been promoted 4 months earlier. So it was like, I didn't think, who thought they were going to lay off a pregnant lady? Right.
Right. Right.
But I was I was a liability because I was going to be out of work for 4 months and they were going to have to pay me. Right? So, and then they didn't, whatever. That's a whole other story. But my point is nothing's guaranteed. Nothing's, and would you, the thing is, on your deathbed, do you ever want to look back and go, wish I'd done all these things? I can't tell you the number of people that come to me after they have a health scare where they kind of wake up and go, I only have one life.
Yeah.
And we do. And
Yeah.
by the way, there's all these ideas about a coach is going to make you burn it all down and like you're going to have all this huge change. Change happens slowly and incrementally. And you're in charge of your life and you're in charge of the changes that you make. And a good coach is never going to make you do anything.
No. No.
They're going to ask you to be aligned with who you are and what you want. That's the whole point. But
Mhm.
there's just there's nothing worse than going back and saying, "I wish I'd done this instead," or "I
Mhm.
wish I'd taken that chance."
Yeah. Well, there's that, and if we circle back to the topic, why does success not feel as good as it looks? So, even if we're not on our deathbed looking back thinking about regrets, like, there's a reason to have our day-to-day experience feel better in the
Yes.
moment,
Yeah,
right?
who wants to walk around in their life feeling empty?
Right, right. So, is it, Michelle, in your opinion, I was just thinking about this, the reason why success does not feel as good as it looks is because it's not your definition of success. It's not your where you're supposed to be.
I
What
think
are your thoughts?
I think that's one part of it. The other thing that I think can often happen is that along the journey to get where you're going, you've often conformed so much to societal standards because you've had your eye on that prize. And then you get there and you realize you've abandoned yourself and
Mhm.
who you are and how you want to show up in the world. And sometimes what I find with people is two things. Sometimes it's actually just about coming back to yourself and showing up in the role you're
Mhm.
in and in the
Mhm.
world you're in from your truest self, from your values and your perspectives. and bringing your full self back to the table. And sometimes there's a total pivot to be made. Sometimes there's a realization that what I've been going after, this thing that I have, is truly no longer what I want.
Mhm.
And then discovering what it is that they do want instead. But either way, there is an element of abandoning yourself and really like listening to the outside world and the outside noise much more than yourself. It a perfect barometer of when this is happening is if you keep thinking, I'll be happy when I hit this next big goal. And then you get there. And that goalpost of when you'll be happy keeps moving and you keep never finding happiness. This is probably you, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that in because that is a big one in terms of we have our eye on the prize and we become the person who we think needs to be to get that prize
That's
based
exactly
on
right.
who else we've seen do it.
That's exactly right. And it's so true in leaders,
Mm.
especially female leaders who have had largely examples of male leaders who've come before them, and not a lot of great examples of female leadership
Mhm.
that owns the incredible qualities that women bring to the table because they're women. And so that I, I work with a lot of women who are in leadership positions and find themselves floundering because they have abandoned their values in leadership.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that in and of itself doesn't feel good. And
Mhm.
so we redefine leadership by what does it mean to you to be a leader? How do you want to show up in the world as a leader? Who do you want to be? How do you want to be that thing? What are the values you want to bring to your team and to the
Mhm.
culture? And that can shift everything. Just getting reconnected to yourself. And it's also a boundaries thing because if you're
Mhm.
abandoning yourself constantly on that road to success and looking at other people's journey as a roadmap, you often throw yourself out the door and the things that you really want. And I'll work as many hours. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself saying yes to everything at work all the time without the capacity to actually do that. And you're killing yourself and you're overwhelmed instead of being able to simply say, listen, I need to know what the priority is, X or Y. That's what I have the capacity for right now. Let's find another way to get Y done. Right.
Mhm.
But we don't learn those things. We have to learn trigonometry in high school, but we don't learn about emotional intelligence. It's mind blowing for me.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I feel like I've been talking about this a lot lately with different people about just and and I think that's where we have to come back to is to have a bit of grace and compassion for ourselves because we didn't learn these things. We were not modeled these things. And so, but in any given moment, we can decide to shift and we could decide, I do want to learn how to do this. And most things in life are just skills and practice and habits. And you can change the way you look at yourself, the way you treat yourself, how to set the boundaries, how to prioritize for you. That kind of thing is something we can learn to do. And it's
100%.
okay that we haven't done it yet because we didn't
It,
know any better. I
it's
mean,
not normal in our
yeah,
society. It's not
yeah.
normal to sit down and say, hey, I want to get really clear about my core values, and then I'm going to use those as a compass for the choices I make in my life. Like, do you have those conversations around a dinner table with friends? No. But it actually, when you sit down, I would challenge anybody who's listening, if you sit down and you do look at your core values, and I usually have my clients pick like 4 or 5, and you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 as to how much you're living that value in your life. What you'll find is that 2 or 3, you're probably living at a pretty high level, and 2 or 3, you're probably living at a pretty low level, and that's where your lack of satisfaction is happening.
Mhm,
And so when you find the gap, then you get to discover how to fill it,
mhm,
right? And
yeah.
to me, that is the number one most important step on the path to discovering what success truly means to you.
Okay. Yeah. And let's talk about that. That's what I was going to ask. And so you started off with values. So what can we do about shifting out of success not feeling great into defining it for ourselves or moving into a path or alignment with ourselves so that we can feel good in what we're doing?
Well, I mean, I truly do feel that getting clarity around your values, and by the way, values are not stagnant. Your values might change from the time, again, that was one of those things I discovered. Like, I had different values when I was performing to when I had a family.
Mhm.
And I think if I'd known about the idea of values along the way, I can look back and go, oh, yeah, my values went from A to Z. And I was trying to fulfill this value of A, but that wasn't actually that important to me anymore. So I was ignoring this other value that became important.
Mhm.
So recognizing what's most important to you and where you're not actually honoring that value in your life and where you're not creating boundaries with other people who aren't honoring that value for you either. So
Mhm.
I really think values and boundaries go so hand in hand with each other because there's a lot of times with a value that there are certain behaviors or ways of being in the world that just don't work for you, that leave you feeling like you've been stepped all over or like you're abandoning yourself or leave you feeling angry, frustrated, unheard, all these different things. Now, it whether there's truth there or not is a whole other conversation, but if you can acknowledge, oh, this value is not being honored and that's why I feel this way,
Mhm.
then that truly allows you to dig in deeper to figure out, how can I honor this value? Is it possible where I am in this position, or do I need to look outside of this organization instead?
Mm.
Sometimes for some people, it's not even a matter of changing jobs. It's just a matter of changing companies to find a
Mhm.
company where the culture is more aligned with the values that you uphold.
Yeah.
And that will bring you a totally different sense of fulfillment.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking when you were talking about that, Michelle, is that just changing the culture in which you work in could it's not like you have to go get re-skilled in a completely different field,
That's
right?
right. Yep.
But one of the things that came up while you were talking for me is that the reason why we need to go and do this initial upfront work and understand our values and have them right in front of us so we can look at them. And this is the same with priorities, our own priorities, is knowing what they are. You cannot force boundaries around something you don't know what it is.
That's right. That's right. And the same thing, I feel the same way about getting really aware around the inner critic voice in your head because people do not realize how many of their thoughts are actually sabotaging them until they actually start to identify that voice. And sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you really hear that judgmental voice. Sometimes it's so sneaky and it sounds like
Mhm.
the voice of reason and it makes so much sense and it's totally rational. So when you really gain clarity, around the voice, and then how to work with it instead of trying to get rid of it because it's never going away, right? That voice is never, it is with us for the rest of our lives. But when we learn how to work with it, it takes away a lot of the power. And so when you can look really clearly at what you want, and then you know how to work with the party that's trying to dissuade you from going after it more effectively, then it's just about going on the journey and learning along the way. You fall down, you figure out why you fell down, and you get back up and go again, and you try something different because what you tried last time had you fall down. So if you try something different next time, maybe there will be a different mistake, but you'll learn from it rather
Mhm.
than, well, if I don't get it the first time, then I failed. And I think that's another thing along another part of that idea of success is that I also think when women get to a certain level, they feel a lot of fear around acknowledging all these thoughts that they're having. So they feel so alone. And yet, so many of them are having these same thoughts, right?
Yes, it's very, very common when you look at the statistics and you look at them around. imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
self-doubt, those types of things. It's very high percent. I think it was 85% of female executives that identify
Mhm.
with having thoughts of imposter syndrome. And it's not just women. There are a lot of men that also feel this way. And it typically has happened a lot in these higher positions because when we as individuals take on these roles and responsibilities or make a big change into something and we're stretching ourselves and we're outside of our comfort zone, to your point, our body, our mind is trying to keep us safe. We've never done it before. We're just trying, we're in this self protection mode of, wait a minute, are you sure you want to do that? Because who knows what's going to happen? A tiger might come out and eat you.
That's
It's like
exactly right.
the protective part of how our brain is wired to keep us safe. And you're right, it won't go away. But I loved, so I had an episode that released a few weeks ago. Whitney Alexandra said, "Your inner critic is fake news." And I just laughed because it is.
That
And
is
it's
funny.
not that it's good to kind of look at it and laugh a little bit. And then you, like you said, work with it and just
Well,
be aware it's not truth that's coming through every
that's
time.
right. And one of the other things, you brought up how many high level executives have imposter syndrome because they're constantly leveling up.
Hmm.
The more you level up and take risks in your life, the louder those voices are going to get. So I actually have the perspective, if you can just shift it and go, oh, there's my imposter syndrome. It means I'm working on something bigger. It's not an indication that I don't know what I'm doing or I'm not on the right track. It's just an indication that I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone. And that's how you innovate and grow.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to avoid imposter syndrome all the time, you will not innovate and grow.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you wanna stay comfortable, you won't have those thoughts. When I was in my 16-year career, I wouldn't have said I identified with anything around imposter syndrome, but I also wasn't pushing myself outside of my comfort zone very often. I wasn't
Right.
volunteering for certain kind of scary things, and I wasn't willing to do that. And the second I step out of that and go start a business, launch a podcast, put my face out there, put my voice out there. Oh yeah, that imposter popped right out
Of course.
in my head, in my body, in my everything. It's just crazy. But it's there and I do also feel the same way you do, Michelle. I actually think it's as much as we don't like it, doesn't feel good, it's kind of a good sign. Like, we're
Yeah.
stretching. Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for
Exactly.
you.
Exactly. So it's just a matter of having that other perspective
Mhm.
to glom onto or to be reminded of. I keep post-its all over my house with little notes that remind me of things like this because especially when we're in the thick of things, it's so easy to forget. And that inner critic and that imposter syndrome voice, they run on automatic. Our our gut and our intuition, we have to remind ourselves to listen to that. That's not our natural state of being. So to have reminders to slow down and to take a beat and to remember to listen to, there's more than one voice in there, right? Is really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and essentially, what we need to do is down the volume on the one and turn up the volume on the other
Totally.
and
That's
create the
exactly
time and
right.
the space and the intention to do it.
Yeah.
And that'll really make a big difference.
Totally.
We're going to start to wrap up here, Michelle. I'd love to
Great.
hear any last closing thoughts or ideas, a pep talk for our female listeners in their careers, going for success. What can they do?
I think like trust yourself. If something's not feeling right, listen to that and also be willing to ask for help. You do not have to figure all of
Mhm.
this out alone. It's very hard to ask the questions to yourself. It's very hard when you're inside the fishbowl to see things. And that's really find somebody, whether it's a coach or a colleague or a mentor, to sit down and have a conversation with to help reflect back to you, to be able to explore a little bit more. But trying to do it in your head just ends up sending you in circles over and over and over again, right?
Mhm.
And so I think when you feel that sense of something's feeling off, don't ignore yourself. Allow yourself to go there and ask the questions, because ultimately, where you'll lead is either to finding out that what you'll find out what wasn't working. It might be a little change, it might be a big change, but you don't want to find yourself in that same position 20 years later, having felt that way for 20 years.
Right.
That's no way to live a life. There is fulfillment and joy and the ability to really operate inside of your zone of genius for everybody. It's
Mhm.
available to you as long as you are willing to actually ask yourself the questions and
Mm.
get intentional about the way you live.
Yep. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. If you could tell our audience how they can connect with you, learn more about you and your work.
You can find me on Instagram at Michelle E. Pollock. And you can find me on LinkedIn, which is actually where I'm starting to show up more these days. My website is michellepollock.com. And right now there's a free download for how to get out of your own way that will take you through a really great exercise actually around getting more in touch with your inner critic and giving you some of the ways you can actually utilize it. And shortly, I have another one coming out that I'm really excited about called How to Stop Saying Yes When You Really Mean No. So that one's around really getting clear about setting boundaries and how to do that. So those are a few of my resources and ways that you can find me and get in touch with me.
Thank you so much. I really had such a great conversation with you today. So I appreciate you sharing your story and your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me, Lori. This was great.
Thank you. Hello, it's Loree Philip here. I just wanted to share a free gift that I created especially for the Daring to Leap community. If you have lost that excitement in your work, I want you to know that you do not have to start from scratch or make a giant leap. There are small things you can shift that will make a big difference. I created a free guide and a workbook called the Career Energy Boost, a powerful resource crafted to help you reignite that spark within your professional life. If you're ready to add some life and vibrancy in your career, you can download your free copy now on the daringtoleap.tv website or by using the QR code on the screen. You deserve a career that brings you joy and fulfillment. Now, back to the show. Thank you for joining us today. Before we go, I'd like to share 3 takeaways from today's conversation. First off, dare to craft your own definition of success. Success doesn't have to be a one size fits all concept defined by society. It's about what fulfills and resonates with you personally. Let your inner voice and values guide your path to achievement. Second, knowing what you want is the first step towards getting it. This may seem obvious, but so many of us travel along a path that's been laid out for us without stopping to ask if it's what we truly want. Take the time for self reflection. It is within that space of questioning where you will find the seed of your deepest dreams and ambitions. And last, it takes courage to focus on your own happiness. It may require stepping out of your comfort zone and sometimes going against the grain. Remember, you deserve happiness just as much as anyone else. So go after it with everything you've got. You can learn more about Michelle on her website at www.michellepollock.com. Make sure to tune in next week. We'll be speaking with Victoria Pelletier about her inspiring journey, what makes her unstoppable, and the future of work. I hope you have an amazing week. It's your time to shine. Bye. Hi, and welcome to Daring to Leap. I'm your host, Loree Philip. Are you chasing a version of success that sparkles on the surface, but somehow leaves you feeling empty inside? Tune in as our insightful guest, Michelle Pollock, helps us uncover